The morning mist clung to the Afghan mountains like a shroud, masking the deadly game about to unfold. Lieutenant Sarah Chun pressed herself against the cold rock face, her breath forming small clouds in the thin air. 3,000 feet below, the valley stretched out like a maze of ancient secrets and modern warfare. Sarah had been with SEAL Team 6 for 18 months now, the only woman to ever make it through their grueling selection process. At 28, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove, yet everything to fight for. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan when she was 5, seeking the American dream. Now, she was living a nightmare version of it, one bullet at a time. The mission briefing had been simple enough. Intel suggested a high-value target was meeting with local Taliban commanders in a compound nestled between two mountain ridges. The team's job was to observe, confirm, and, if necessary, eliminate. What the briefing hadn't mentioned was the spider web of enemy snipers that had turned the entire valley into a killing field. Commander Jake Morrison crouched beside her, his weathered face tense with concentration. At 42, he had seen more combat than most soldiers see in 3 lifetimes. His eyes, the color of storm clouds, constantly scanned the terrain ahead. He had handpicked Sarah for this mission, not because she was the token female, but because she was the best damn sniper he had ever worked with. "Chun, you see anything on the ridge line?" Morrison's voice was barely a whisper, carried away by the mountain wind. Sarah adjusted her scope, the crosshairs dancing across the jagged peaks. Her heart rate was steady at 60 beats per minute, the same as when she was sleeping. Years of meditation and training had taught her to find stillness even in chaos. Through her scope, she caught the glint of metal reflecting the early morning sun. Contact. Sniper position, ridge line, approximately 800 meters northeast. Her voice was calm, professional. Inside, her mind was already calculating wind speed, bullet drop, and a dozen other variables that meant the difference between life and death. The rest of the team spread out in a defensive perimeter. Sergeant Danny Rodriguez, the team's demolitions expert, took cover behind a boulder 20 meters to their left. His normally jovial demeanor had been replaced by the focused intensity that kept them all alive. Corporal Mike Stevens, their medic, positioned himself with a clear view of potential escape routes. The newest member, Petty Officer Tom Bradley, found cover behind an outcropping of rocks, his hand steady on his rifle despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Morrison studied the terrain through his binoculars. The compound they needed to reach was still 2 kilometers away, but between them and their objective lay a valley that had become a shooting gallery. Intelligence reports had suggested light resistance, but the reality on the ground was painting a very different picture. "Sir, I've got another position," Bradley whispered into his comm northwest, about 600 meters. Sarah swung her scope in that direction and immediately spotted the second sniper's nest. The enemy had chosen their positions well, creating overlapping fields of fire that would make movement across the valley virtually impossible for a conventional force. "That's 2 confirmed," Morrison muttered. "Chun, what's your read on their positioning?" Sarah had been studying sniper tactics since she was 16, long before she ever thought about joining the military. Her father had been a competitive marksman in Taiwan before emigrating, and he had taught her to see patterns where others saw only chaos. Now, that training was about to save their lives. "They're using a classic overlapping coverage pattern," she said, her eye never leaving the scope. "If there are 2 visible positions, there are likely at least 3 more we haven't spotted yet. Probably 5 total, maybe more." Morrison's jaw tightened. 5 enemy snipers meant their mission had just become exponentially more dangerous. Each sniper could cover approximately a quarter-mile radius with deadly accuracy. Together, they had turned the entire approach to the compound into a kill zone. "Rodriguez, what do you think about a diversionary explosion on the eastern slope?" Morrison asked. The demolitions expert shook his head. "Sir, that would just announce our presence to every hostile in a 5-mile radius. Plus, we need to get within range to plant charges, and with this much overwatch, we'd be sitting ducks." Stevens, monitoring their 6 o'clock, suddenly held up his hand for silence. Through his scope, he had caught movement on a ridge behind them. "Commander, we might have a problem. I think we've got company coming up our back trail." The situation was deteriorating rapidly. What should have been a straightforward reconnaissance mission was turning into a potential ambush with the team caught in the middle. Sarah could feel the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a familiar burden. She had felt this same pressure during sniper school, when instructors had designed impossible scenarios to test her breaking point. She had never broken. How many? Morrison asked Stevens. At least 6, maybe 8. They're still about a kilometer out, but they're moving in our direction with purpose. Someone knows we're here. Morrison's mind raced through their options. They could abort the mission and try to extract, but with snipers covering their route out and hostiles approaching from behind, retreat might be more dangerous than advancing. They could call for air support, but the nearest friendly aircraft was 40 minutes away, and the weather was closing in fast. Sarah had been listening to the tactical discussion while continuing to study the sniper positions through her scope. Something was nagging at her, a pattern in their positioning that seemed almost too perfect. She had read every manual on sniper tactics the military had ever produced, and she had studied the methods of legendary marksmen from around the world. What she was seeing didn't fit standard doctrine. "Commander," she said quietly, "I need to share something with you." Morrison moved closer, staying low to avoid presenting a target to the enemy snipers. "These positions," Sarah continued, "they're not just random defensive placements. Someone with serious training set this up. Look at the angles." She guided Morrison's attention to each visible sniper nest, explaining how they had been positioned not just to cover the valley, but to provide mutual support for each other. If one position was compromised, the others could provide covering fire for repositioning or retreat. "Whoever planned this knows what they're doing," she concluded. "This isn't local Taliban. This is professional." Morrison felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. If Sarah was right, they weren't just facing local fighters with surplus rifles. They were up against trained marksmen who had turned the entire valley into a carefully constructed trap. The radio crackled with an encrypted message from their base. Morrison listened to the brief transmission, his expression growing darker with each word. "Gentlemen and lady," he said, turning back to his team, "we just got new intel. Our high-value target isn't just meeting with local commanders. He's supposedly meeting with a foreign sniper instructor who's been training Taliban marksmen for the past 6 months." The pieces began falling into place. The professional positioning, the careful coordination, the trap-like nature of the setup. They weren't just walking into an ambush. They were walking into a graduation exercise for an enemy sniper school. Sarah felt her pulse quicken slightly, but her hands remained steady. She had trained for scenarios like this, though she had never imagined facing them in her first year with the SEALs. Around her, she could sense the team's tension rising. They were all experienced warriors, but being outnumbered by trained snipers in mountain terrain was every soldier's nightmare. "What's the call, Commander?" Rodriguez asked. Morrison looked at each member of his team. These men and women had followed him through some of the most dangerous missions in the War on Terror. He had never asked them to face impossible odds, but today might be the exception. "We have 2 options," he said. "We could try to extract, fighting our way through the snipers and the hostiles coming up behind us. Or we can complete the mission, which means getting through that valley and reaching the compound." "Sir," Bradley said, his voice betraying his nervousness. "With respect, both options sound like suicide runs." Morrison nodded grimly. "That's an accurate assessment, son." Sarah had been studying the valley through her scope while listening to the discussion. Her mind was processing dozens of variables: wind patterns, light conditions, terrain features, and the behavioral patterns she had observed in the enemy positions. Slowly, an idea began to form. "Commander," she said, "what if we didn't have to fight through them?" Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Explain. What if we could eliminate the threat without them ever seeing us coming?" The team exchanged glances. Rodriguez was the first to speak. "Chun, there are at least 5 enemy snipers out there, possibly more. They've got overlapping fields of fire and excellent positioning. How do you propose we take them out without them spotting us first?" Sarah adjusted her position slightly, getting a better angle on the valley floor. "Because they're positioned to watch for a team movement. They're not expecting a single operator." Morrison studied her face, seeing the quiet confidence that had made her legendary in sniper school. "You're talking about a solo infiltration?" "I'm talking about what I was trained to do," Sarah replied. "Precision elimination of high-value targets in denied terrain." Stevens looked skeptical. "Sarah, even if you could somehow get close enough to engage 1 or 2 of them, the others would zero in on your position immediately. You'd be outgunned 5 to 1. Sarah had anticipated this objection. "Not if they never know I'm there." She turned to Morrison, her dark eyes intense with focus. "Sir, I've been studying their positioning for the past 20 minutes. They're good, but they're following textbook procedures. That means they're predictable." Morrison leaned in closer. "What are you thinking?" "Give me 2 hours," Sarah said. "I can reach a position where I'll have clear lines of sight on at least 3 of their nests. If I'm right about their training, the others will be positioned in a pattern I can predict." "And then what?" Morrison asked. Sarah's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "Then, I do what I was born to do." The wind picked up, carrying with it the distant sound of voices from the hostiles approaching their position. Time was running out, and Morrison knew he had to make a decision that would either save his team or get them all killed. He looked at Sarah one more time, seeing not just the young woman who had fought her way into the most elite fighting force in the world, but the warrior she had become. Her plan was dangerous, possibly suicidal, but it might be their only chance. "Chun," he said finally, "if you're going to do this, you need to do it now. We can hold this position for maybe another hour, but then we're going to have to start moving whether you're back or not." Sarah began checking her equipment with methodical precision. Her rifle was a custom-modified Barrett M82A1, chambered for .50 caliber rounds, and equipped with a state-of-the-art scope that could track targets at distances beyond normal human capability. She carried 48 rounds of ammunition, each one capable of stopping a man at over a mile. "Rodriguez," she said, "I need you to create a small diversion in exactly 90 minutes. Nothing major, just enough noise to draw their attention southeast for about 30 seconds. The demolitions expert nodded. "I can do that." Sarah turned to Stevens. "If I don't make it back, tell my parents I was doing what I believed in." Before anyone could respond, she was gone, melting into the rocky terrain like a ghost. Morrison watched through his binoculars as she disappeared completely from view within 50 meters. He had worked with some of the best soldiers in the world, but he had never seen anyone move with Sarah's combination of speed and stealth. Sarah made her way carefully down the mountainside, using every piece of cover the terrain provided. She had studied topographical maps of this region for hours before the mission, memorizing every ridge, every boulder, every potential hiding spot. Now, that preparation was keeping her alive. The first sniper position was 800 meters away, but Sarah knew she couldn't approach directly. Instead, she began a wide flanking maneuver that would take her nearly 3 kilometers out of her way. The route would be exhausting and dangerous, but it would keep her invisible to the enemy overwatchers. As she moved, Sarah's mind went back to her childhood in California. Her father had taught her to hunt in the mountains outside Los Angeles, instilling in her a deep respect for the patience and precision required to be truly effective. He had taught her that the best snipers weren't just good shots. They were students of human nature, able to predict their target's behavior and exploit their weaknesses. 2 hours later, Sarah had reached a position that gave her clear lines of sight on 3 of the enemy sniper nests. Through her scope, she could see the snipers themselves, professional soldiers who had no idea they were being watched. She began the careful process of range finding and wind calculation, preparing for what would either be the most important shots of her career or the last one she would ever take. The afternoon sun was beginning to cast long shadows across the valley. In 30 minutes, Rodriguez would create his diversion. Sarah would have one chance to eliminate multiple targets before they realized what was happening. Everything she had trained for, everything she had sacrificed to become a SEAL, had led to this moment. She settled into her firing position and began to control her breathing. In the distance, she could hear the voices of her teammates, holding their position against increasing enemy pressure. Their lives depended on what happened in the next few minutes. Sarah Chun had never missed a shot that mattered. Today would not be the first time. Sarah pressed herself against the cold granite, her body becoming one with the mountain itself. Through her scope, she studied the first target with the clinical detachment of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. The enemy sniper was approximately 700 meters away, positioned behind a carefully constructed hide made of local rocks and vegetation. She could see him clearly now, a bearded man in his 30s, wearing surplus military gear and carrying what appeared to be a Russian-made Dragunov sniper rifle. He was good at his craft. His position offered excellent concealment and multiple escape routes. But he had made one critical mistake. He had fallen into a routine. For the past 40 minutes, Sarah had watched him scan his assigned sector in a predictable pattern. 30 seconds focused on the valley floor, 15 seconds checking the ridge lines, then a brief moment to adjust his position before beginning the cycle again. It was textbook sniper procedure, exactly what they taught in military schools around the world. It was also exactly what would get him killed. Sarah's breathing slowed to match the rhythm of her heartbeat. The wind was minimal at this elevation, maybe 3 miles per hour from the northwest. The distance was well within her effective range, though the angle was challenging. She would have to account for the downward trajectory and the way gravity would affect her bullet's path. Through her earpiece, she heard Rodriguez's voice, barely audible, 60 seconds to showtime. The diversion would give her the opening she needed, but timing would be critical. She had to eliminate at least 3 targets in rapid succession before the others could identify her position and return fire. Miss one shot, take too long between targets, or fail to relocate quickly enough, and she would become the hunted instead of the hunter. Sarah shifted slightly, adjusting her position to get a clear line of sight on the second target. This sniper was positioned on a rocky outcropping 600 meters to the east of the first. Through her scope, she could see that he was younger, maybe mid-20s, but his positioning showed the same professional training. He was scanning his sector with mechanical precision, his rifle tracking slowly across predetermined arcs of fire. The third target was the most challenging. Located nearly 1,000 meters away on the highest ridge, he had the best vantage point of all the enemy snipers. From his position, he could see almost the entire valley and provide overwatch for the other positions. Taking him out would require a shot at the extreme edge of her rifle's effective range, compensating for wind, elevation, and the curvature of the earth itself. Sarah's mind went back to her training at the Special Operations Target Interdiction course. Her instructor, Master Chief Petty Officer James Crawford, had pushed her beyond what she thought were her limits. He had made her take shots that seemed impossible in conditions that would challenge even experienced snipers. At the time, she had wondered if his demanding standards were excessive. Now she understood that he had been preparing her for exactly this moment. 30 seconds, Rodriguez whispered. Sarah chambered her first round, the metallic click absorbed by the wind and the vast emptiness of the mountains. The .50 caliber cartridge was designed to stop vehicles and penetrate body armor. Against human targets, it was devastating and immediate. There would be no wounded enemies to raise alarms or call for reinforcements. Through her scope, she watched the first target complete another scanning cycle. She had timed his pattern precisely. In 20 seconds, he would begin his scan of the ridge lines. For exactly 12 seconds, his attention would be focused away from her position and toward the area where Rodriguez would create his diversion. 15 seconds. Sarah's world narrowed to the crosshairs of her scope. Her breathing became mechanical, controlled, a rhythm that had been drilled into her through thousands of hours of training. Her heart rate dropped to 50 beats per minute. Her muscles relaxed, even as her mind focused with laser-like intensity. 10 seconds. The first target shifted in his hide, adjusting his rifle to begin his next scan. Sarah tracked him smoothly, the crosshairs centered on a point just below his left shoulder blade. At this angle, the bullet would penetrate his heart and exit through his chest, killing him instantly and silently. 5, 4, 3. Rodriguez's explosive device detonated on a ridge 800 meters southeast of the sniper positions. It wasn't large enough to cause significant damage, but the sharp crack echoed across the valley like thunder, immediately drawing the attention of every enemy fighter in the area. Sarah squeezed the trigger. The Barrett's muzzle blast was absorbed by the carefully designed suppressor, reducing the sound to a sharp crack that would be masked by the echoes from Rodriguez's explosion. The recoil was massive, but Sarah had braced for it, allowing the rifle to settle back into position quickly. Through her scope, she saw the first target slump forward in his hide. The .50 caliber round had done its work with brutal efficiency. One down. Sarah immediately swung her rifle toward the second position, her movements fluid and practiced. The younger sniper was still focused on the area of Rodriguez's explosion, his rifle pointed away from Sarah's position. She centered her crosshairs and controlled her breathing. The second shot came 6 seconds after the first. The target never saw it coming. He simply ceased to exist. His life ended by a bullet he never heard coming. 2 down. The third target was more challenging. At nearly 1,000 meters, the shot required precise calculation and perfect execution. Sarah adjusted for the increased distance, the thinner air at this elevation, and the slight crosswind that had picked up since her first shot. Through her scope, she could see that the distant sniper was becoming alert to danger. His scanning pattern had become erratic, no longer following the predictable routine she had observed earlier. He knew something was wrong, but he didn't know what or where the threat was coming from. Sarah waited. Patience was the sniper's greatest weapon, more important than marksmanship or equipment. She watched the target through her scope, studying his movements, waiting for the moment when he would present her with the shot she needed. The opportunity came when he turned to communicate with someone through his radio. For just a moment, he was motionless, presenting his profile to Sarah's position. She squeezed the trigger for the third time. At this distance, it took nearly 2 full seconds for the bullet to reach its target. Sarah watched through her scope as the .50 caliber round struck with devastating effect. The distant figure crumpled and disappeared from view. 3 down, but Sarah knew the job was far from over. According to her analysis, there should be at least 2 more sniper positions, possibly 4 more. The enemy would now know they were under attack, and they would be searching desperately for the source of the threat. Sarah began moving immediately, relocating to a position 300 meters from where she had fired her shots. The rocky terrain provided excellent concealment, but she knew that trained snipers would be able to calculate the approximate location of her firing position based on the angles of the shots that had eliminated their colleagues. As she moved, Sarah's earpiece crackled with Morrison's voice. "Chun, whatever you just did, it worked. We can see movement in the valley. Looks like someone's panicking down there." Sarah didn't respond. Radio transmissions could be intercepted, and maintaining communications discipline was critical when operating behind enemy lines. She would report when she was in a secure position and had completed her mission. Finding her new firing position, Sarah immediately began scanning for the remaining enemy snipers. They would be more careful now, knowing that they were being hunted by someone with exceptional skill. The easy shots were over. Now came the real challenge. Through her scope, Sarah caught movement on a ridge approximately 800 meters to the north. She watched patiently as a figure moved between cover positions, clearly agitated and searching for targets. This was the 4th sniper, and he was making the mistake of letting his emotions override his training. Sarah tracked him through her scope, waiting for him to commit to a position. When he finally settled behind a boulder and began scanning with his rifle, she was ready. The 4th shot was clean and immediate. For down. The valley had grown eerily quiet. Sarah could hear the wind whistling through the rocks and the distant voices of her teammates, but the methodical scanning that had characterized the enemy sniper positions had stopped completely. Either she had eliminated all the threats, or the remaining snipers had gone to ground and were waiting for her to reveal her position. Sarah spent 20 minutes in careful observation, studying every potential sniper hide in the surrounding terrain. Her scope revealed no movement, no glint of metal, no disturbance in the natural patterns of the landscape. But her instincts told her that the threat wasn't over. The 5th sniper revealed himself through a mistake that cost him his life. Sarah caught the brief reflection of sunlight off his scope as he adjusted his position on a ridge nearly 1,200 meters away. The shot was at the extreme limit of her rifle's effective range, requiring precise calculation and a degree of luck that even experienced snipers rarely relied upon. But Sarah had trained for impossible shots. She adjusted for the extreme distance, the unpredictable mountain winds, and the challenging angle. When she fired, she knew the shot was perfect even before the bullet reached its target. 5 down. The silence that followed was complete. Sarah waited another 30 minutes, scanning every possible position where a 6th sniper might be hidden, but the valley seemed empty of threats. Through her scope, she could see movement near the compound that was their original objective. Figures were running between buildings, clearly aware that their overwatch had been compromised. Sarah began her movement back toward her team's position, taking a different route than her approach to avoid any potential ambushes. The mission was far from over, but the immediate threat had been eliminated. Her teammates could now move through the valley without fear of being targeted by enemy snipers. As she climbed back up the mountainside, Sarah reflected on what had just happened. In the space of 40 minutes, she had eliminated 5 trained enemy snipers without taking a single return shot. It was a level of precision and tactical effectiveness that would have seemed impossible to her just a few years ago. But the cost weighed on her mind. Each target had been a human being, someone with a family, dreams, and fears just like her own. The fact that they were enemy combatants didn't change the fundamental reality that she had taken 5 lives in less than an hour. Sarah had known this day would come when she chose to become a sniper. The training had prepared her for the technical aspects of long-range shooting, but nothing could truly prepare someone for the emotional weight of taking human life. She had learned to compartmentalize these feelings, to focus on the mission and the protection of her teammates rather than dwelling on the individual cost of each shot. When she reached the rally point, Morrison was waiting with an expression of amazement and respect that she had never seen before. "Chun," he said quietly, "I've been doing this for 20 years, and I've never seen anything like what you just accomplished." Sarah checked her equipment and prepared for the next phase of the mission. "Sir, the Overwatch has been eliminated. We should be able to move through the valley now." Morrison studied her face, looking for signs of stress or emotional impact from what she had just done. What he saw was the calm professionalism of a warrior who had completed a difficult task and was ready for whatever came next. "How many?" he asked. 5 confirmed kills. The valley should be clear of sniper threats." Rodriguez let out a low whistle. 5 snipers? In one engagement. Sarah shouldered her rifle and checked her ammunition. She had 43 rounds remaining, more than enough for whatever challenges lay ahead. "Sir, we should move soon. The compound will be on alert now, and they might try to evacuate the target." Morrison nodded and signaled for the team to prepare for movement. As they began their descent into the valley, he couldn't help but marvel at what had just occurred. Sarah Chun had single-handedly eliminated an entire sniper team that could have decimated his unit. She had done it with a precision and efficiency that bordered on the supernatural. But Morrison also knew that the mission was entering its most dangerous phase. They had eliminated the Overwatch, but the compound itself would be filled with hostile forces who now knew that American Special Operations Forces were in the area. What came next would test every member of the team to their limits. The valley floor was a maze of ancient irrigation channels and stone walls that had been built centuries before the current conflict began. Sarah moved through this terrain like a shadow, her rifle ready and her senses attuned to every sound and movement around her. Behind her, the rest of the team followed in tactical formation, each man covering a different sector and maintaining the spacing that would prevent a single enemy burst from taking out multiple operators. The compound was still 800 meters ahead, nestled against the base of a cliff that provided natural protection from air assault. Through her scope, Sarah could see movement in the windows of the main building and figures running between the various structures that made up the complex. The elimination of their sniper Overwatch had clearly caused panic among the enemy forces. Morrison held up his hand, signaling for the team to take cover behind a series of stone terraces that had once been used for farming. The commander studied the compound through his binoculars, noting defensive positions and potential entry points. "Chun, what's your assessment of their defensive posture?" he asked quietly. Sarah had been observing the compound since they entered the valley. Her sniper training had taught her to analyze not just individual targets, but entire tactical situations. She could see patterns in the enemy's movement that revealed their strengths and weaknesses. "Sir, they're scared," she said. "Look at the way they're moving between buildings. No coordination, no overlapping fields of fire. They're reacting to our presence instead of executing a defensive plan." Morrison nodded. Sarah's analysis matched his own observations. The enemy forces were clearly rattled by the sudden elimination of their sniper support. They were making the kinds of mistakes that got people killed in combat. "But," Sarah continued, "they still have us outnumbered probably 3-1, and they know this terrain better than we do. They might be panicked, but they're not helpless." Rodriguez had been studying the compound's layout through his own optics. As the team's demolitions expert, he was looking for structural weaknesses and potential breach points. What he saw made him frown with concern. "Commander, those buildings are old, but they're solid stone construction. If we need to blast our way in, it's going to take some serious explosives. And with the target potentially inside, we risk eliminating him along with any intelligence he might have." Stevens, monitoring their communications equipment, suddenly held up his hand for silence. Through his headset, he had picked up radio chatter from inside the compound. He listened carefully for 30 seconds before turning to Morrison. "Sir, they're speaking in Arabic, but I'm catching some English words mixed in. Sounds like they're trying to coordinate with someone outside the compound. They might be calling for reinforcements." Morrison felt the familiar weight of tactical decision-making settling on his shoulders. Every moment they waited increased the risk that enemy reinforcements would arrive and turn their small unit operation into a major engagement. But rushing the compound without proper reconnaissance could walk them into a trap that would get everyone killed. "Chan," he said, "can you get us overwatch on the compound from here?" Sarah studied the terrain between their position and the target. There was a ridge line approximately 300 meters to the east that would give her an elevated position overlooking the entire complex. From there, she could provide sniper support while the rest of the team made their approach. "Affirmative, sir. Give me 15 minutes to reach that ridge, and I can cover your approach from elevation." Morrison considered the plan. Splitting his team was always risky, but Sarah had proven her capabilities beyond any doubt. Her overwatch could be the difference between mission success and catastrophic failure. "Do it," he decided. "Rodriguez, Stevens, Bradley. We move on the compound in 20 minutes. Chun will provide precision fire support and early warning if reinforcements arrive." Sarah checked her equipment one final time and began moving toward the ridge line. Her route took her through a series of dry stream beds and ancient stone walls that provided concealment from the compound's windows. The terrain was treacherous, with loose rocks and hidden crevices that could easily turn an ankle or create noise that would alert the enemy to her movement. As she climbed, Sarah's mind was racing through tactical scenarios. From her elevated position, she would have clear lines of sight into most of the compound's windows and courtyard areas. If enemy fighters tried to engage her teammates from fixed positions, she could eliminate them with precision fire. But she would also be exposed to return fire from multiple directions, and her escape routes would be limited. The ridge line was steeper than it had appeared from a distance. Sarah found herself climbing nearly vertical rock faces, using every technique she had learned in mountain warfare training. Her rifle, ammunition, and equipment added 40 pounds to her body weight, making each handhold a test of strength and endurance. When she finally reached her firing position, Sarah was breathing hard, but her hands were steady. The view of the compound was everything she had hoped for. She could see into 3 of the 4 main buildings and had clear lines of sight covering all the approaches her teammates would use. Through her scope, Sarah began identifying specific targets. She counted at least 12 enemy fighters moving between the buildings, though there were certainly more inside the structures themselves. Most were carrying AK-47 assault rifles, but she spotted at least 2 with RPGs and what appeared to be a heavy machine gun position on the roof of the central building. Her earpiece crackled with Morrison's voice. "Overwatch. Report when ready." "Overwatch in position," Sarah replied. "I count 12 visible hostiles, mixed small arms. Be advised, they have at least 1 crew-served weapon on the main building roof." "Copy that. We're beginning our approach." Sarah watched through her scope as her teammates began their movement toward the compound. They moved with the fluid coordination that came from years of training and combat experience, each man covering the others as they bounded from cover to cover across the open ground. The enemy spotted them when they were still 200 meters from the compound's outer wall. Sarah saw muzzle flashes erupt from several windows as the defenders opened fire with automatic weapons. Her teammates immediately took cover and began returning fire, but they were pinned down in terrain that offered minimal protection. Sarah's first shot eliminated the machine gunner on the roof before he could bring his weapon to bear on her exposed teammates. The .50 caliber round struck with devastating effect, and the heavy weapon tumbled from the rooftop to crash in the courtyard below. Her second and third shots took out 2 fighters who were laying suppressive fire from upper-story windows. Each shot was precisely placed, eliminating the threat immediately and allowing her teammates to continue their advance. Rodriguez reached the compound's outer wall first, using a shaped charge to blow a breach in the ancient stonework. The explosion sent debris flying across the courtyard and created a cloud of dust that provided concealment for the team's entry. But as Morrison, Stevens, and Bradley rushed through the breach, Sarah saw something that made her blood run cold. Through a window in the main building, she caught sight of a figure she recognized from their mission briefing photos. It was their high-value target, and he was moving toward what appeared to be a back exit. "Commander, the target is mobile," Sarah transmitted. "Main building, moving toward the rear exit." Morrison's response was immediate. "Can you intercept?" Sarah was already calculating angles and distances. The target would exit the building approximately 400 meters from her position, but he would be moving, and there were several potential obstacles between her location and his escape route. Negative on a clean shot from this position, she replied. I need to relocate. What Sarah did next would later be studied in special operations training courses around the world. Instead of trying to reposition for a difficult shot on a moving target, she made a decision that demonstrated both tactical brilliance and extraordinary courage. She abandoned her secure overwatch position and began a controlled descent down the ridge face, moving at maximum speed while maintaining enough control to avoid a fatal fall. Her objective was to reach ground level and intercept the target before he could escape into the maze of mountain trails that surrounded the compound. Meanwhile, Morrison and his team had entered the compound and were engaged in close-quarters combat with the remaining defenders. The narrow passages and multiple levels of the ancient buildings created a three-dimensional battleground where threats could come from any direction. Rodriguez's expertise with explosives proved invaluable as he systematically cleared rooms using flashbang grenades and precisely placed charges. Stevens provided medical support when Bradley took a grazing wound to his shoulder, but the young SEAL remained combat effective and continued the mission. Sarah reached the base of a ridge just as the high-value target emerged from the rear of the compound. He was accompanied by two bodyguards, both carrying assault rifles and scanning constantly for threats. They began moving quickly along a trail that led into the mountains, clearly following a planned escape route. Sarah found herself in a situation that no amount of training could fully prepare someone for. She was alone, pursuing three armed enemy fighters through terrain they knew better than she did. Her teammates were still engaged in fighting inside the compound and couldn't provide immediate support. But the mission depended on capturing or eliminating the high-value target. He possessed intelligence about Taliban operations and foreign fighter networks that could save American lives and disrupt enemy operations across the region. Letting him escape was not an option. Sarah began her pursuit, using every piece of cover the mountainous terrain provided. Her quarry had a head start, but they were moving quickly and carelessly, leaving signs that she could follow. Broken branches, disturbed rocks, and footprints in the sparse soil created a trail that was easy to read for someone with her tracking skills. The chase led higher into the mountains, away from the compound where the sounds of gunfire were beginning to diminish. Sarah could hear her teammates' voices on the radio as they systematically cleared the remaining buildings, but she was moving too fast and focusing too intently on her pursuit to maintain constant communication. After 30 minutes of hard climbing, Sarah caught sight of her quarry. The high-value target and his bodyguard had stopped to rest in a small clearing surrounded by large boulders. They clearly believed they had escaped pursuit, and their guard was down. Sarah positioned herself on a ridge overlooking the clearing, approximately 300 meters from the target. Through her scope, she could see the high-value target clearly for the first time. He was a man in his 50s, well-dressed despite the circumstances, and clearly someone accustomed to command and authority. The mission parameters called for capture if possible, elimination if necessary. Sarah keyed her radio and transmitted her position to Morrison, requesting instructions on how to proceed. The response came back immediately. The target was too valuable to risk losing, and Sarah was authorized to take whatever action was necessary to prevent his escape. Sarah studied the situation through her scope. The two bodyguards were positioned where they could provide security for their principal, but their positioning also created challenges for a sniper attack. If she eliminated one, the other would immediately move to cover and potentially use the high-value target as a human shield. The solution required split-second timing and absolute precision. Sarah would have to eliminate both bodyguards in rapid succession, then immediately shift to non-lethal targeting of the principal if he attempted to flee. Sarah controlled her breathing and settled into her firing position. The first shot eliminated the bodyguard on the left side of the clearing. Before his body had even hit the ground, Sarah had shifted to the second target and fired again. The second bodyguard fell before he could react to the fate of his companion. The high-value target immediately began running toward the tree line, but Sarah was ready for this reaction. Her third shot was carefully placed to wound rather than kill, striking him in the leg and bringing him down without causing fatal injury. Sarah immediately began moving toward the clearing, knowing that she needed to secure the target before he could escape or injure himself further. As she approached, she could hear him shouting in Arabic, though whether he was calling for help or expressing anger was unclear. When she reached the clearing, Sarah found the high-value target conscious but unable to walk due to his leg wound. She quickly secured his hands with flex cuffs and called for medical evacuation while applying basic first aid to prevent excessive blood loss. Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece. Chun, report status. Target secured. 2 enemy Kia, requesting immediate medical evacuation for wounded prisoner. The response was immediate. Outstanding work. Extraction team is inbound. ETA 20 minutes. As Sarah waited for the evacuation helicopter, she reflected on what had just transpired. In the space of a few hours, she had eliminated 7 enemy snipers and captured a high-value target while operating largely alone in hostile territory. It was a level of tactical success that exceeded even the most optimistic mission planning. But the cost weighed heavily on her mind. 7 more lives had been taken, and while each death had been necessary for mission success and the protection of her teammates, the emotional impact was cumulative. Sarah knew that she would carry the weight of these actions for the rest of her life, regardless of their tactical and strategic justification. The sound of approaching helicopters broke her from these thoughts. The extraction was beginning, and soon they would be back at base where intelligence specialists would begin the process of extracting information from their capture prize. The mission was a success, but Sarah knew that the real impact of what they had accomplished would only become clear in the weeks and months ahead. The helicopter ride back to base was conducted in relative silence. Sarah sat across from the wounded high-value target, monitoring his condition while the team medic worked to stabilize his leg wound. The prisoner was conscious but refused to speak, staring at her with a mixture of hatred and what might have been respect. Morrison sat beside her, occasionally stealing glances in her direction. In 20 years of special operations, he had witnessed extraordinary acts of courage and skill, but what Sarah had accomplished in a single afternoon defied conventional understanding of what one person could achieve in combat. The captured terrorist leader was a prize beyond anything their intelligence community had hoped to acquire. According to preliminary identification, he was responsible for training programs that had produced dozens of enemy snipers who had killed American and coalition forces across Afghanistan and Iraq. His capture would likely save hundreds of lives and provide intelligence that could disrupt enemy operations for years to come. But Morrison could see the toll the mission had taken on Sarah. She sat with the rigid posture of someone maintaining control through sheer force of will. Her hands, which had been rock steady during the engagement, now showed a slight tremor that only someone with his experience would notice. The base came into view as they crested the last mountain ridge before the landing zone. Forward Operating Base Wolverine was a collection of prefabricated buildings and defensive positions carved into a strategic valley that provided access to several infiltration routes into enemy territory. It was home to approximately 200 American and coalition personnel, ranging from special operations teams to intelligence analysts to the support personnel who kept the war machine functioning. As they landed, Sarah could see that word of their mission success had already reached the base personnel. A crowd had gathered near the landing zone, including officers from the intelligence section who would begin immediate interrogation of their prisoner. Colonel Patricia Hendricks, the base commander, was waiting as they disembarked from the helicopter. A veteran of Iraq and Afghanistan with 3 decades of military experience, she had personally requested that SEAL Team 6 be assigned to this operation. The successful capture of the high-value target represented a significant intelligence victory that would enhance her base's reputation throughout the special operations community. Outstanding work, Commander Morrison, Colonel Hendricks said as the team leader approached. Preliminary reports suggest this was a textbook special operations mission. Morrison glanced back at Sarah, who was helping to transfer the wounded prisoner to a stretcher carried by base medical personnel. Ma'am, the success of this mission is primarily due to the extraordinary performance of one individual. Colonel Hendricks followed his gaze to Sarah, who was now checking her equipment with the methodical precision that characterized everything she did. The colonel had read Sarah's personnel file and was aware of her unprecedented performance in sniper training, but seeing her in person after such a successful mission provided a different perspective. Lieutenant Chun, the colonel called out. Sarah approached and rendered a crisp salute. Mom. I understand you eliminated 7 enemy snipers and captured the target essentially single-handedly. Ma'am, I was part of a team. The mission's success was the result of coordinated effort by all personnel involved. Colonel Hendricks studied Sarah's face, noting the exhaustion and emotional strain that she was trying to conceal. Military personnel were trained to compartmentalize the psychological impact of combat operations, but even the best training had its limits when faced with the reality of taking multiple human lives in a single engagement. Lieutenant, I want you to report to medical for a standard post-mission evaluation. After that, you'll have a 48-hour stand-down period before we conduct detailed mission debriefings. Sarah nodded. She understood that the medical evaluation was partly routine and partly an assessment of her psychological condition. The military had learned through bitter experience that even the most resilient soldiers could be affected by traumatic combat experiences, and early intervention was critical for preventing long-term problems. The medical evaluation was conducted by Captain Jennifer Walsh, a psychiatrist who specialized in treating special operations personnel. Dr. Walsh had seen hundreds of soldiers dealing with the aftermath of combat operations, and she recognized the signs of someone struggling to process what they had experienced. "How are you feeling, Sarah?" Dr. Walsh asked as they sat in her small office within the base medical facility. "I'm fine, ma'am. Mission accomplished, no friendly casualties, high-value target in custody." Dr. Walsh noted Sarah's instinct to focus on mission parameters rather than emotional responses. This was common among special operations personnel who were trained to prioritize tactical considerations over personal feelings. "That's an excellent mission summary," the doctor said. "But I'm asking how you are feeling, not how the mission went." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I've never killed that many people in one day before." Dr. Walsh nodded. This was the opening she had been waiting for, the moment when Sarah's professional composure gave way to human vulnerability. "Tell me about that." 7 confirmed kills. 7 human beings who woke up this morning and went to work just like I did. Now they're dead because I'm better at my job than they were at theirs. The raw honesty of Sarah's statement revealed the depth of her emotional struggle. Despite her extraordinary tactical success, she was grappling with the fundamental moral complexity of taking human life, even in a combat situation where it was clearly justified. Dr. Walsh spent the next hour helping Sarah process her feelings about the mission. They discussed the difference between killing in combat versus murder, the protection of her teammates that had resulted from her actions, and the larger strategic impact of capturing the high-value target. But they also acknowledged the very human cost of what had transpired. "Sarah, what you accomplished today will likely save dozens, perhaps hundreds of American lives. The intelligence we gained from that prisoner could disrupt enemy operations for years. But that doesn't make it easy to live with, and it doesn't mean you should feel good about taking 7 lives." Sarah looked up at the doctor with eyes that seemed older than her 28 years. "Then, how am I supposed to feel?" "Complicated," Dr. Walsh replied. "Proud of your tactical excellence and your service to your country, but also grieving for the necessity of what you had to do. Those feelings aren't contradictory. They're both valid responses to an extraordinary situation." That evening, Sarah sat alone in her quarters, a small room that contained little beyond a cot, a footlocker, and a small desk. She had declined invitations from her teammates to join them for the informal celebration that traditionally followed successful missions. Instead, she found herself staring at the satellite phone that would allow her to call her parents in California. The 12-hour time difference meant it was mid-morning in Los Angeles. Her parents would be starting their day, probably having breakfast while reading the news and planning their activities. They had no idea that their daughter had just completed one of the most successful special operations missions of the war. Sarah picked up the phone and dialed the familiar number. "Hello." Her mother's voice sounded impossibly distant and normal. "Hi, Mom. It's Sarah. Sweetheart. What a wonderful surprise. How are you? Are you safe?" Sarah felt tears threatening for the first time since the mission began. Her mother's concern and love seemed to bridge the vast distance between the warrior she had become and the daughter she had been. "I'm safe, Mom. I just wanted to hear your voice." They talked for 20 minutes about everyday things. Her father's latest home improvement project, her mother's garden, news from former classmates who were pursuing normal careers and normal lives. Sarah didn't mention the mission, the 7 lives she had taken, or the weight of responsibility she carried. Instead, she allowed herself to be reminded of the world she was fighting to protect. After ending the call, Sarah lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling. Through the thin walls of her quarters, she could hear the muted sounds of base operations, vehicles moving, personnel going about their duties, and the distant sound of aircraft operations. It was the soundtrack of war, as familiar to her now as a traffic noise had been during her civilian life. Tomorrow would bring extensive debriefings with intelligence analysts who would want to extract every detail about the enemy sniper positions, their tactics, and their equipment. There would be recommendations for commendations and awards, updates to training protocols based on lessons learned, and analysis of how her techniques could be applied to future operations. But tonight, Sarah simply tried to process the reality that she had become something she had never imagined when she first enlisted. She was no longer just a soldier or even just a sniper. She had become a force of nature, capable of eliminating entire enemy units through skill, training, and sheer determination. The question that haunted her was whether she could maintain her humanity while wielding such deadly effectiveness. Each mission that required her to take lives added to the weight she carried, even when those actions were tactically and morally justified. 3 days later, Sarah stood in Colonel Hendrick's office receiving notification that she was being recommended for the Silver Star, the third highest military decoration for valor in combat. The recommendation cited her elimination of 7 enemy snipers and the capture of a high-value target while operating independently in hostile territory. Lieutenant Chun, the colonel said, "What you accomplished represents the finest traditions of American special operations. Your actions undoubtedly saved the lives of your teammates and provided intelligence that will protect countless other service members." Sarah stood at attention, accepting the recognition while feeling the complex mix of pride and burden that had become her constant companion. She was proud of her service and her capabilities, but she was also aware that each recognition brought her further from the person she had been and deeper into a role that would define the rest of her life. "Thank you, ma'am. I was just doing my job." Colonel Hendricks studied Sarah's face, recognizing the emotional complexity behind her professional demeanor. "Lieutenant, with capabilities like yours comes a heavy burden. The special operations community will be looking to you for similar results in future operations. Are you prepared for that responsibility?" Sarah thought about the question for a moment before responding. She could feel the weight of expectation settling on her shoulders, the understanding that she had established a standard of performance that would be difficult to maintain, but impossible to abandon. "Yes, ma'am. I'm prepared to serve wherever and however my country needs me." As Sarah left the colonel's office, she reflected on how completely her life had changed since joining the SEALs. She had become someone capable of extraordinary things, but those capabilities came with a price that she was only beginning to understand. Walking across the base toward the training facilities where she would begin preparing for the next mission, Sarah realized that she had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. She was no longer just a soldier. She had become a weapon in human form, and the military would continue to deploy her wherever that weapon was needed most. The thought was both empowering and terrifying. But as she picked up her rifle and began her daily training routine, Sarah knew that she would continue to bear whatever burden was required to protect her teammates and serve her country, no matter the personal cost. 6 months later, Sarah found herself back in the mountains of Afghanistan. But this time the landscape looked different through her experienced eyes. What had once seemed like an endless maze of rocks and ridges now revealed patterns and opportunities that only came with combat experience. She had returned to these mountains 4 times since the mission that made her legendary, each operation building on a reputation that now preceded her wherever she went. The captured high-value target from her first major solo operation had provided intelligence that led to the disruption of 3 major enemy training camps and the elimination of dozens of foreign fighters who had been preparing to attack coalition forces. The ripple effects of that single mission continued to save lives months later, validating the strategic importance of precision special operations in modern warfare. But success had brought its own challenges. Sarah's name was now whispered among enemy forces as the ghost in the mountains, a phantom sniper who could appear anywhere and eliminate entire enemy units without warning. The psychological impact of her reputation had become a weapon in itself, causing enemy forces to abandon positions and alter their tactics simply out of fear that she might be operating in their area. This psychological warfare effect was both an asset and a burden. While it provided tactical advantages for coalition forces, it also meant that Sarah could never again operate with the anonymity that had characterized her early missions. Every enemy fighter in Afghanistan now knew her description and would shoot her on sight if given the opportunity. Commander Morrison had been promoted to full colonel and now oversaw multiple special operations teams across the theater. But he still personally led missions when Sarah was involved, understanding that her unique capabilities required leadership that could maximize their strategic impact while protecting her from the increased dangers that came with her notoriety. Today's mission was different from anything Sarah had attempted before. Intelligence had located a meeting of senior Taliban commanders in a remote mountain compound, but the gathering was protected by an entirely new level of security. The enemy had learned from their previous encounters with American Special Operations Forces and had adapted their tactics specifically to counter the kind of precision strikes that Sarah had made famous. The compound was protected by not 7, but 15 enemy snipers positioned in a complex, overlapping pattern that covered every possible approach. These weren't local fighters with basic training. They were professionals recruited from special operations units around the world specifically to counter the threat posed by operators like Sarah. John Morrison said as they studied satellite images of the target area, "This is the most sophisticated defensive setup we've encountered. These snipers know exactly who they're trying to stop, and they've positioned themselves specifically to counter your capabilities." Sarah examined the imagery with the clinical attention of someone studying a chess game played by masters. The enemy positions showed a level of tactical sophistication that impressed and worried her. They had studied her previous operations and developed countermeasures designed to neutralize her advantages. "Sir, they're using a rotating observation pattern," she said after several minutes of analysis. "Each position provides overwatch for 2 others, and they're cycling their attention so there's never a predictable gap in coverage." Staff Sergeant Maria Rodriguez, who had joined the team as their new intelligence specialist, highlighted additional details from the surveillance footage. "Ma'am, they're also using counter-sniper equipment we haven't seen before. Thermal imaging, sound detection systems, and what appears to be electronic surveillance of radio frequencies." The mission had evolved beyond a simple elimination or capture operation. It had become a direct confrontation between Sarah's revolutionary sniper techniques and an enemy force that had been specifically organized and trained to defeat her. Morrison studied his team, weighing the risks against the strategic importance of the target. The Taliban commanders meeting in that compound were planning coordinated attacks against multiple coalition bases. Eliminating them would save hundreds of lives and disrupt enemy operations for months. But attempting the mission might result in the loss of the most effective special operations asset the military had developed in decades. "Chun, I need your honest assessment. Can this mission be accomplished?" Sarah had been studying the enemy positions for 30 minutes, running tactical scenarios in her mind and calculating probabilities of success. What she was seeing challenged every technique she had developed and would require innovations that pushed beyond proven methods into uncharted territory. "Sir, it can be done, but not the way we've done it before." "Explain." Sarah turned to face her commander, her dark eyes reflecting the intensity of someone who had found a solution to an impossible problem. "We've been thinking about this as a sniper problem, but it's really a systems problem. They're not just individual targets. They're components of an integrated defensive network." Morrison leaned forward, recognizing the tone in Sarah's voice that indicated she had developed one of the tactical innovations that had made her legendary. "Instead of eliminating them sequentially," Sarah continued, "we need to eliminate them simultaneously. Disrupt the entire network at once so they can't adapt or respond." Rodriguez looked skeptical. "Ma'am, that would require multiple shooters in coordinated positions. We don't have enough qualified snipers for an operation of that complexity." Sarah had anticipated this objection. "We don't need multiple shooters. We need multiple shots from a single shooter executed with precise timing across multiple positions." What Sarah was proposing had never been attempted in combat. She would move through a planned sequence of firing positions, taking shots at predetermined intervals designed to eliminate the entire enemy network before any individual sniper could identify her location and respond. The plan required mathematical precision in timing and movement, combined with shooting accuracy that exceeded anything she had previously demonstrated. A single missed shot or timing error would alert the entire enemy force to her presence and turn the mission into a suicide run. Morrison studied the proposal for several minutes before responding. Chen, what you're suggesting is beyond anything in our tactical doctrine. The risk factors are enormous. Yes, sir. But so is the strategic value of the target. The discussion continued for another hour as the team analyzed every aspect of Sarah's proposed approach. They calculated timing sequences, identified potential failure points, and developed contingency plans for scenarios where the primary plan might go wrong. Finally, Morrison made his decision. We proceed with Chen's plan, but I want additional support elements in position, and I want extraction assets standing by in case we need to abort. The infiltration took 18 hours, with Sarah moving through terrain that challenged every technique she had learned in mountain warfare training. The enemy had positioned observation posts along all the traditional infiltration routes, forcing her to take a path that required technical climbing skills and navigation through areas where a single mistake would result in a fatal fall. By dawn, Sarah had reached her first firing position, a narrow ledge on a cliff face that provided line of sight to 3 of the enemy sniper nests. She would have less than 10 seconds at each position before she had to move to avoid return fire, and the distances involved required shooting accuracy at the extreme limits of human capability. Sarah's first shot eliminated a sniper positioned 847 meters away, the bullet striking with precision that seemed to defy the laws of physics. She was moving toward her second position before the sound of the shot had finished echoing off the surrounding peaks. Her second position provided angles on 2 additional targets. Sarah eliminated both with shots separated by less than 3 seconds, then immediately began moving toward her third firing point. The enemy network was beginning to realize they were under attack, but they couldn't yet identify the source of the threat. Positions 3 through 7 fell in rapid succession as Sarah moved through her planned sequence with mechanical precision. Each shot was calculated and executed with the mathematical precision of a computer program, but delivered with the human intuition that separated her from conventional snipers. By the time the remaining enemy snipers realized what was happening, their entire defensive network had been compromised. Sarah had eliminated 12 of the 15 snipers in less than 20 minutes, moving through terrain that should have made such an operation impossible. The final 3 snipers attempted to coordinate their response, using radio communications to triangulate Sarah's likely position based on the angles of her shots. But Sarah had anticipated this response and had positioned herself where their calculations would lead them to look in the wrong places. Her final 3 shots came from a position that shouldn't have provided line of sight to their locations, executed through gaps in the terrain that required bullet trajectories calculated with surveyor-level precision. When the last enemy sniper fell, the compound's entire defensive network had been eliminated by a single operator in less than 30 minutes. Morrison and the rest of the assault team moved on the compound immediately, meeting no resistance as they systematically cleared the buildings and captured the Taliban commanders who had been meeting inside. The intelligence gathered from this operation would later lead to the disruption of coordinated attacks planned against 7 coalition bases. But the true significance of the mission went beyond its immediate tactical success. Sarah had demonstrated capabilities that redefined what was possible for a single special operations soldier. Military analysts would study this operation for years, trying to understand how one person could defeat a defensive network that should have been impossible to overcome. When Sarah returned to base after the mission, she found herself facing a decision that would define the rest of her military career. Her capabilities had evolved beyond anything the special operations community had previously imagined, but utilizing those capabilities was requiring missions of increasing complexity and danger. Colonel Morrison, now responsible for strategic planning across the entire theater, presented her with options for her future service. She could continue with increasingly challenging solo operations, transition to training other snipers, or accept assignment to a new program that would develop tactics based on her innovations. Sarah chose to continue with operational missions, understanding that her unique capabilities represented a strategic asset that could save lives and achieve objectives that were impossible through conventional means. But she also accepted responsibility for training selected personnel in the techniques she had developed, ensuring that her innovations would outlast her individual service. Over the following months, Sarah's reputation grew beyond the military community. Her story became part of special operations legend, inspiring a new generation of soldiers and changing fundamental assumptions about what individual operators could achieve with proper training and tactical innovation. But the personal cost continued to accumulate. Each mission added to the psychological burden she carried, and the isolation that came with her unique role made it difficult to maintain connections with people who hadn't shared similar experiences. Sarah found herself existing in a world where very few people could understand the realities of what she faced or the decisions she had to make. 3 years after the mission that made her famous, Sarah stood on a mountain ridge in Afghanistan, looking out over terrain where she had eliminated more than 40 enemy combatants in service to her country. The war was winding down, but her role in it would be remembered as representing something new in military history: the evolution of special operations capabilities beyond traditional limitations. As she prepared for what would be her final mission in Afghanistan, Sarah reflected on how completely her life had been transformed by the choices she had made and the capabilities she had developed. She had become something unprecedented in military history, a force multiplier who could achieve strategic objectives through individual action. The young woman who had joined the SEALs to prove herself had evolved into a warrior whose very existence changed the tactical calculations of enemy forces across an entire theater of operations. She had paid a personal price for that transformation, but she had also saved hundreds of lives and achieved military objectives that would have been impossible through conventional means. Standing alone on that mountain ridge, Sarah understood that she had become part of something larger than herself. Her story would inspire future generations of soldiers and would demonstrate that individual excellence, properly applied, could change the course of conflicts and save countless lives. The ghost in the mountains had become legend, but the woman who created that legend continued to serve with the quiet professionalism that had always defined her character. Sarah Chun had proven that the limits of human capability existed primarily in the imagination, and that those limits could be transcended through training, dedication, and an unwavering commitment to protecting others. As the sun set over the Afghan mountains one final time, Sarah began her descent toward the extraction point that would take her home. The war was ending, but the techniques she had developed and the standards she had established would continue to protect American soldiers for generations to come. The ghost legend would live forever in the mountains where she had written it, one impossible shot at a time.